Hello there and welcome to Breath of Life Art Studio. My name is Josh Foreman and I love making video game art stuff. Like I made these Zelda guys over here and this Guild Wars 2 worm over here. And so when I found out that Bethesda was offering a actual real-life Pip-Boy with the special edition, I was super stoked because, well, it's one of my favorite RPG franchises. I have to say, Fallout 2 is probably my all-time favorite role-playing game experience. Weird, right? Yeah, I'm that old. Anyway, so let's check out what this Pip-Boy is. So the reason I'm doing a tutorial here is because this thing is so cool, right? The problem with it is that the finish is just totally wrong. It looks like cheap plastic, which I'm sure that's what it is. It's shiny and it doesn't have all that weathering and wear and tear that you see in the game. So I want to show you guys a really quick and easy way to dirty and scuff this guy up and make it look more like the in-game prop. If it sounds intimidating, don't be intimidated. This is actually pretty basic entry-level stuff. Like, all the supplies are going to be stuff that you can pretty easily find at craft store or hardware stores. So yeah, let's get to it. Let me show you what we're going to use. This is it. So, some painter's tape. You can actually use any kind of tape that you want, but this is probably the best. Pepper. Don't ask yet. I'll explain. Steel wool. You're gonna need some paper towels. Hobby knife. A couple of paintbrushes. They don't need to be anything fancy. And then 3 colors of super cheap old acrylic paint. So this is stuff that you can get at Michael's or Hobby Lobby, pretty much any hobby store. You know, this giant thing here is $3. So smaller ones are like $1 or less. So I'd say the overall cost of materials for this is probably under $10. Alright, so let's get started. The way I'm going to approach this is I am going to use the box that it comes in as sort of a test bed. I'm going to apply the paints and all that other fun stuff and make sure it looks really good on this first before we delve into this, because this has lots of little fiddly bits and accoutrements and greebles and on, and so I feel more comfortable if I've tested out all the techniques on this box first, just in case something about this particular kind of plastic is weird or something. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the foam insert out, because we don't want to get paint dripping on that. And then I'm just going to take my steel wool. Actually, another supply that's kind of useful, I always have on hand a bunch of rubber gloves. They just save you time in hand washing, and with steel wool it gets like little bits of steel everywhere, and just rather have a layer between me and the wool. Okay, and what I'm basically doing is just giving a quick once over, rubbing the surface. Now I'm not going to rub really around where the paint is because it'll scrape it right off. And what this is doing is it's sanding the surface, but kind of at a micro level. The thing that makes this plastic look so shiny is the surface is very smooth, and so this knocks down that shine by roughening it up, and this will also help the paint to stick to it better. This really annoying part right here where the sticker was on there, and so my steel wool is sticking on it, and I just have to kind of power through that. You'll notice I'm kind of going, I'm definitely going in circles as I sand. I'm not going like this, because when you do that, it's going to start leaving very straight gouges and lines in there. You don't want that. You just want a subtle buffing. And I am kind of going very gently over the print on here too, just to kind of keep it somewhat uniform. I'm going to walk this outside to blow off all the little particulates because I don't want tiny metal bits floating around my work area. 1 second. Being over there reminded me of some of these other tools. Now this is completely optional step here, but I like to go in and just do a little bit of chips and dings and stuff to give this a little more character. You know, weathering really tells a story, and I think the story I'm trying to tell with this piece is that this is the box that the Pip-Boy is in, right? But the Pip-Boy is not going to be nearly as weathered as the box. The box could have been buried under rubble for years, or you know, stolen by raiders, and then those raiders were killed, and some, you know, Caesar's legion grabbed it, whatever, right? There's like, it's lived a long life, is the idea. It's always cool to look at reference, so just like Google old metal box or something like that, and you'll get a lot of ideas for this kind of stuff. Generally anything that protrudes out from the, you know, inset surface is going to get banged up the most. So if you don't have a file handy, no biggie, you could use your hobby knife. Just kind of chip away at things. Alright, let's start slathering some paint on here. So you're going to want lots of paper towels. I just use a paper plate as a palette. Okay, we're going to start with the brown. So this is a dark chocolate color, whatever that means, right? It's like, look at the reference. I've got some reference here, and kind of the rusty, dusty patches are dark brown. So this color looked pretty close. The thing about rust is that it has kind of a bubbly, chipped texture to it. So that's where the pepper comes in. I'm going to just grind some pepper onto it. You can just use pre-ground pepper as well. I like the ground kind because when you grind it up, it has a lot more variety of sizes of bits and pieces in there. Let's see, so I'm going to use my brush, my larger brush, and just pat it in there. Okay, so this is basically what 90% of this paint job is going to be. So I'm just going to show you. I'm going to start on the back. When you're starting a new thing, learning a new thing, whatever, always start on the back or bottom of things, right? Because you'll learn and you'll get better as you come to the front. Like in developing video games, that's one of the first things we learn, is that you make the first level that the player is going to play the last, because you're going to know everything that's coolest at that point and know how to do it best. Okay, so I'm just going to splat some brown in all the cracks. Well, and you do not have to be precise or deft with this at all. I'm kind of purposefully making it messy. I'm trying to get around all the seams. That's where rust and dust builds up the fastest. Okay, now I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm stopping at this point, because if you paint the entire thing and then go in and do this next step, it's going to be too late. because this next step is, forgot to mention, you're going to need some water. So this next step is pretty much getting rid of about 90% of what you just painted on there. And you do that by getting a wet paper towel and you just dab it over and over and over. Now notice what I'm not doing. I'm not rubbing up and down like this. That's not going to get you the results you want. You want to dab. You may have to resort to more vigorous rubbing like that if the paint's starting to dry on you, and then you kind of want to peel it up. Now the nice thing, what makes this so easy, is because the surface here is colored plastic, so you can always sand away any of the paint you've done and start over in that area if you don't like the look. But also it's okay to get some lines like this, some weathering lines. We're going to go in and do kind of another wash of paint, of age marks over this after we get the rust part in, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, and then you just repeat the process. The only really important thing about this stage is to make sure that you get the paint into all the little cracks and crevices. It's going to look weird if parts of it are the surface color. Dipping my paper towel in again to give it a little more cleaniness. Leveled up its cleaniness. I'm just going to go in and randomly give it a little splotches here and there, and then mostly get rid of them. If you're going to err on the side of being too aggressive or too subtle, go too subtle at first, because it's super easy to go in and add layers if it seems too subtle. It's harder to unsubtleize things. Now you'll notice I'm using the same paper towel, or I've used the same paper towel for almost half the surface area already, and that's fine. I'm getting little excess parts where I'm accidentally dabbing over and getting these kind of spots which look like little rust spots. That's totally fine. Also, if you look close here, you can see the little bits of pepper that kind of randomly land around. Again, just a nice little added level of detail. I don't really want the rust color to be on the black part. I kind of see that as a different material, so it would have weathered differently. So even though I'm getting paint all over it, I simply wipe it off right afterwards. And there'll be a tiny residue, but that's fine. Alright, so that's already looking quite a bit better, but we're going to take it up yet another notch in a minute. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set this aside after you put the first coat on, let that completely dry, and then the next wash that we put over it, because the paint underneath is pretty dry, we can still do the same dabbing technique without taking up this brown coat that we just put on. Firefly reference. Okay, so let's see. Here's what we're going to do while that paint's drying. And this is what you're going to do if you don't care about your box and you just want to make your Pip-Boy pop. This is what the painter's tape is for. We're going to cover up all the areas that we don't want weathering on. And that is going to be these little glass pieces here, the little lights, and well, we'll have to cover up the inside, I think. In fact, let's just remove the padding altogether. We could weather this part, but A, no one will ever see it, and B, because it's flexible, it's really unpredictable how the paint's going to react. It would probably chip off and rub all over your arm. You can see in here there's some exposed electronics in here, and given that we're slathering paint all over the place, it's probably best to cover that up. In fact, even before we do that, probably a good idea to remove the battery. And all this other fun stuff we don't want to have paint leaking onto. So I'm going to seal that up pretty well. Make sure no stray liquid's going to fall down into there. Okay, for the little clear plastic / glass bits, there's two ways you can do it. You can use scissors to cut out a shape pretty close to it and put it on. Or if you want to do it the quick way, you can put a piece that's roughly about the same size and carefully use your hobby knife to cut around it. Since we're going to be kind of doing a little bit of, we're going to be beating this thing up a little bit anyway with our chisel and hobby knife, it's fine to have little scratches around it. Alright, I think that's sufficiently protected. Let's put this aside for a minute. Come right back to it. Let's do our second coat of grunge on this guy. So for this one, I'm going to use black. In this case, I'm going to put a little bit of the water just right on there because I want it to be pretty wet. I'm doing about 50% water, 50% paint. I'm using my same brown brush. It's not really cleaned very well because the brown and the black is going to get all mixed together anyway once it's on the surface. No big deal. I just realized I passed up a perfect opportunity to make a joke about the water being radiated. Such a failure of a YouTuber. Anyway, you learn by doing, right? Okay, so, oh yeah, pepper. And I did mention the pepper is completely, what's the word, optional. Again, just gives a little more randomized grit in there. Okay, we're going to start on the back again. Now with this layer of paint, I'm going to be wiping off a lot more than we did on the last one. So the last one, it was like maybe 80–90% wiped off. This is going to be closer to like 95% wiped off. Just looking to get the very darkest crevices, I guess you could say. I'm dipping my paper towel in the water more frequently, getting it wetter. And I really don't even mind if water starts dripping down because that's going to give me some nice weathering anyway. Like I said, I want this to look like it's been outdoors for many years. In fact, I'm going to go in and add some kind of wet drips here and there. One thing you want to avoid when you're weathering and aging things is being really mathematical with it or something. Like, you wouldn't want a drip coming from every single one of these. It would start to look artificial. And sometimes when you're doing this, you'll get happy little accidents. For instance, I was doing this line, I was padding, and I kind of missed that part, but actually something about it speaks to me, right? It just looks right. So I'm just going to leave that dark part there. This, however, does not look right, because why would weathering, you know, drip slightly sideways like that? So dab it away. This is another good spot to do a drip because if you think about it, rainwater falling down on this would pool in this little crevice here. and run down. So I'm loading quite a bit of paint on there, and then I'm just going to dip my brush in water, pat it on a couple times till we get some nice runoffs there. Now in this case, I'm feeling like it's a little too dark. So I'm just going to dip my paper towel in more water and let the water up here naturally kind of wash it down. That dilutes it. So at the point your paper towel has so much paint in it that when you're dabbing, you're actually applying more paint than you're pulling up. That's when it's time to get rid of that paper towel and grab a new one. So here's a chance to add some asymmetry to the weathering, which is good. You want your weathering to be asymmetrical. I'm not going to do a bunch of runoff on this side. Okay, here's a tip. I should have done this bottom side up first and got those undersides, because now if I flip it sideways or upside down, then all these little natural rivulets that are happening are gonna go wonky and crooked halfway through. So I'm just gonna let that sit for a little bit. Remember, if you don't see the brown layer when you're tapping or patting the black paint off, then you're not taking enough of the black off. Keep wiping it down until you're sure that you're seeing that brown layer underneath. In most areas. Again, you don't want to be too systematic with it, but in general, you want to see that brown layer that you put down. Alright, now one little finishing touch I like to do is a little spattering. So I'm just going to take some of my brown, mix it in with my black. I really don't care much about the color as long as it's just something grungy in general. And then I take my finger, well, again, always do the back first. And see what I'm doing? I'm just pulling it back and letting go, and it just spatters these little tiny speckles around. In places where, like, there it got a little too globby and painty looking, so I'm just gonna dab that back. I feel like these little bolts here need to be black. So I'm gonna take my slightly finer brush. Let's get some black without pepper in it. Alright, we're going to let this dry. And then we're going to do the very final little detail pass on that. But while we're waiting for that, we're going to hop back to the Pip-Boy. And I'll start sanding it down to get it ready. Now because this plastic is so incredibly smooth and shiny, I'm being a little more aggressive with my sanding. And I'm also going to use a toothpick. One second. I think I have a toothpick. Yeah. I'm going to use a toothpick and wrap my steel wool around there so that I can make sure that I'm sanding in the joints and the cracks and crevices, because that's where most of the paint needs to stick. Again, I'm being very gentle as I go over the printed parts. There's a little bit of silver paint on a lot of these screws, although strangely not all of them, like that one. But I'm not too worried about scraping that paint off, because we're going to be reapplying silver over those parts on the final pass. I think I'm going to abstain from hitting it with the hammer, just because it does actually have electronics in there. Okay, sufficiently scuffed up. Let's put that aside. And back to our last detail on the box. So this was the last paint color I had here. But this is silver. This is just craft silver. And here we're going to go to all the little nicks and scuffs that we made with our tools. We're going to do little bits of the silver poking through. So that gives the illusion that whatever this paint coating is, it's over metal. And when it gets hit really hard, the paint chips off and you see the metal underneath. And again, subtlety is the key here. Just want to do very slight suggestive marks. Here's a long line there. That's too thick. I'm just going to take my finger and just rub most of it right off. When you rub your finger over it, you're taking it off all the stuff from the flat spot and leaving it in the crevice, so it works out really well. I'm also going to hit little corners and sides of this bolt. Try not to be super consistent. Again, you want it to kind of be randomized a bit. Notice I'm barely kissing the edge with my brush, and my brush does not have a lot of paint on it. In fact, you can do what's called dry brushing, where you take, when you're doing corners like this is the best way to do it. You dab your brush in the paint, and then you get most of it off on a paper towel, and then what's left will give you a nice, subtle little, just little tiny bits, which is what you're looking for. Every once in a while, I load my brush up with a tiny little drop, and I'll just barely touch it here or there to give just a stronger glimmer here and there. But do not overdo that, or it's going to look like glitter. Okay, I think that's good for the box. I'm going to come back and I'm going to do a clear coat over this at the end of the video, and I'll show you the product that I use for that. That's kind of an optional thing. It depends on how much you're going to be manhandling your props here, whether you really need that or not. I mean, if this is just going to sit on a display stand, probably doesn't need it. But if you're going to be using it every day and actually trying to play the game with it, probably a good idea to invest in that clear coat stuff. Alright, ready to rock with the first brown coat. Always start on the back. Alright, we're going to let that coat dry, and then we'll come back and do the black coat. Make sure you wash your brushes between coats and don't just let them sit out to dry like I always do. Fortunately, I only use very cheap brushes. Mostly cheap brushes. Okay, some time has passed and the paint is dry. Let's do the black coat. Again, I'm going to add about 50% water to 50% paint. Don't have to be precise at all. I'm starting on the back. Remember, I'm trying to take away about 95% of the black paint that I put down because I want to see mostly the brown. The black is really there just to emphasize the cracks. Here's a rule of thumb to keep in mind whenever you're painting any kind of moving props, is after you get the paint on there and before it dries, move the prop so that the joints and everything can slide past each other. That'll make sure that the paint that gets inside the cracks will smear thin enough that it's not going to crack and break off the first time you move it. Quick tip, make sure that every couple of minutes you stop painting it and just look at every conceivable angle, because it's pretty common, I just did it, to completely forget about an area that you painted, and that paint's drying in the meantime, so it's going to be way harder to get off. So yeah, because there's all these little nooks and crannies and bits and bobs. So yeah, do that. One of the nice things about this process is because this is acrylic paint and it's on plastic that is the color of the base coat, you can sand or scrape away any paint you don't like. I got all this kind of brown, see if you can see that, right inside there, and it just, you can see the brush strokes, so I don't like that, so I'm just going in with my hobby knife and scraping it away. Super easy. Okay, now in the game, these little vents here are black, so I'm going to go in with a fine brush and color those in. I'm going to use undiluted black for this. If you don't have a teeny tiny brush like this, you can use a toothpick, same toothpick you were sanding with. Just dip it in the paint so that it has a teeny tiny amount on there and rub it in. Takes a little bit longer than a brush, but it gets the job done. That reminds me, I forgot to get the bolts on the bottom of the box. I'm gonna go in and darken some of the little embedded areas around the bolts, just so that when I paint the silver on them, it'll really pop. It also helps them feel more like separate pieces, because these bolts are just part of the same plastic piece that was stamped in a big machine, right? So there is no actual different part, but if you paint black around the base of them, it visually separates them, makes it feel more like an assembled assemblage rather than one single piece of plastic. At this point, that black layer that I applied is starting to dry. It's about halfway dry, so I'm going through and moving all the movable parts again. Alright, I think we're done with the black layer. Don't need to let it dry all the way before we start the next process, which is doing these kind of actual rust marks. So like everything we've done so far is sort of the grit and grime that builds up over time when you use a device outside. But it's not, none of this is meant to simulate what actually happens when paint starts peeling off, bubbling off, and the elements get to the metal underneath. And that's what these more aggressive marks are. So I'm going to use my reference and try to basically block out where they're going to be. Different metals rust with different colors, and the colors here are kind of a brownish, blackish, which those are the two colors I picked because of that. So I'm going to probably mix the brown and the black pretty thick. I might do just a drop of this rusty red. This is called barnyard red, but I mean anything that's rusty looking should work fine. I'm going really heavy with the pepper on this one because rust is the kind of flakiest, grittiest substance. Okay, I'm going to use my, not my tiny brush, my medium-ish brush to start laying in the patches of rust. So let's see what we've got. We've got rust around these little nubbins, a little bit on that edge, a lot coming down here, so we'll start with that. This rust layer I'm doing very thick because I want the texture to actually stand up off the surface a little bit. Around the edges, I'm making sure that I'm tapping my brush and rotating it slightly as I tap, so that I'm getting the border of the rust nice and organic and crumbly. You don't want just a like smooth line generally around the rust spot. And by tapping the brush straight down onto the surface, the bristles are naturally going to spread apart and start giving you some texture. Assuming you're using a flat-edged brush. Okay, let me point this out real quick. So, you don't want to use this kind of brush that kind of tapers at the end. You want to use a brush that has a flat end, so that when you tap it, those bristles break apart a little bit and make little spots and cracks and stuff. And if you don't like the shape of the rust spot you've got, you just wipe it off and go over that spot again. Here's something you could do to add a nice bit of texture to your lumpy rust. I'm just taking the flat end of a toothpick, dipping it in the thick paint, and just dabbing it on. The little peaks that come up from the paint will kind of go down as it dries, but it'll leave some kind of texture behind, which is what we're looking for. The pepper that's ground up in there will also kind of emerge as because acrylic paint is water and medium, and as the water evaporates, it gets smaller because there's less material there, leaving just the paint behind. And so you'll have more of the texture showing through from the pepper, but you'll have less from the little dabs that you're doing here. Alright, we're going to set that aside to let it dry. Okay, next step is I'm going to take some of this brown, lighter brown, and I'm going to take a smaller detail brush, starting on the back. I'm going to kind of lightly brush in the middle sections of the rust patches. So basically I want a ring of darkish area to surround a little bit lighter rust coat. And again, I don't want to be super mechanical and consistent with how thick the dark edge is. It will look like a painted on camouflage pattern if it's really uniform. So trying to randomize my strokes, how hard I push, and the direction that my brush goes. Keeps it nice and noisy and inconsistent. Okay, after it's you've got that first thing down, let me show you a close-up of it. So you can see the little grit from the pepper really showing through, and you can see how as I'm dabbing it on, it's a very mottled, inconsistent amount. So you're still seeing some of the dark in various areas in there, which is good. You want that. And after that coat is dry, which should be less than a minute, I'm going through with a fully loaded brush again, and I'm just hitting a few little spots here and there just to punch up the rust color a touch in areas. See how I just kind of speckle it on pretty randomly. These are the areas where basically it's rusted the most. That'll tend to be near the middle of the rust spots, but not always. Right, mix it up a little bit. Look, this one I'm putting more towards the edge, and I just like the way that looks. Alright, now we're going to do the little silver bits. So just like with the box, we're using straight silver, no water, a fine tip brush, and just kind of kissing the tips of bits that should be metal. In the game, you can always see these little fins kind of glinting as it rotates, so there's definitely, and it makes sense, right? Like, these would have rusted, but because they get banged so much, you're gonna see a lot of the natural metal coming through. So I'm just kind of messily brushing it on there. Then I'm gonna go over with my finger to knock it down a little bit. Because you don't want it like sparkly shiny. You just want a hint that there's some burnished metal under there it's burnished by getting rubbed from hitting things so often. But as it hits things, it doesn't do so in a uniform way, right? It's totally random, so you want little specks of it to be shiny in some places and dull in other places. I'm finding all the little chisel marks, or not chisel, file marks that are in there, and putting a little streak inside of it. Then I'm going to hit some of the black knobs a little bit, like they've been worn down. Actually, I'm going to switch to a more medium-sized brush for this, because I want to do the dry brush thing. Again, for a dry brush, you get your tip pretty covered. You dab off most of it on a paper towel, and then you just lightly flick it over the edges. And that'll put the paint just on the little raised bits. And I'm randomly choosing places to rub it on. I'm not being super consistent with having it go all the way around on every ridge, because life and weathering is random. Life is also like a mop. This is really the only thing that I try to be semi-consistent with, is in places where the metal is really gouged into, I do want to make sure that I put some silver in there. Alright, we're going to let that dry and then apply the clear coat. Okay, all dry, ready to do the clear coat. This is the product that I use. It's a little spindier than something you might get at the hardware store, but it is formulated very specifically for going over like miniatures and props and stuff to give it a matte coat. That's the super important part. It needs to be matte. If it's glossy, semi-glossy, eggshell, any of those derivations, it's going to go back to looking like a plastic toy. So, let's start with this box. So in general, you want to use a breath mask or take it outside. It's too cold right now to do that for me, so I'm just going to suck it up and die a year earlier. All for you. So you spray from 8 to 12 inches away. Try to do an even coat. I usually do a double coat in areas where I know it's going to get touched a lot. Yeah, so pretty easy. Gonna do the same thing on this guy. So I'm thinking about usage and where fingers are gonna touch the most often. So I wanna make sure that I get a really good coat all around here, because obviously that's where your finger's going the most often. And around knobs and stuff, which I guess you just fiddle with for fun. But alright, let's get the tape off and get it all repackaged. A little bit of grunge that got onto the glass, and that's probably fine. I'll scrape it back a little bit, but it's all part of the aesthetic. And there you have it. A beautiful, refurbished, truly been in the wasteland looking Pip-Boy. So hey, if you like this kind of thing and would like me to do more of it, please comment down below and let me know, hey, I like this and I want to see more of it. Even better, you could subscribe, you could like it, you could share it with your friends, you could print out every frame on a sequential piece of paper and make a huge flip book of this video and just watch it over and over every day. There's lots of things you can do with this content, but especially supporting what I'm doing with likes and subscribes, that's the best way to do it. I've got some really cool things coming up. Oh, before I forget, let's see, go over here, and if you like this kind of painting stuff, check out more painting tutorials that I've done on stuff that I go over several different surface effects and that kind of stuff. So check that out. Was that all I had to say? Oh, I also have another tutorial I'm kind of in the middle of. I'm doing this huge Colossus. It's like literally this big from Shadow of Colossus. See how big that is? It's so big it goes out of the frame. That's how big it is. Yeah, so stay tuned for that stuff. And I guess we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me. Have a good one.